It also means it has that much more capacity to do both mental and physical damage to humans.
The scientists assure us that they know precisely what's going on in the ionosphere. But short of pumping that energy up there, do they have any way of knowing what might happen with even 3 million watts, let alone the focused energy of 3 billion watts of effective radiated power?
We have, I believe right now, 18 different colleges and universities that are working the program with us. University scientists are interested because they're studying science, and this is a major effect on the Earth, and so they want to know more about what it is and what it does.
What we can do with an antenna is change the portion of the sky into which we insert the energy. But because we're squeezing the megawatts into a narrow beam, then in a very tiny area, you can create what's it called, an effective gigawatt.
So there are some things we do know. What we don't know is why the government suddenly became interested in this strange technology.
Haarp began with a congressional insertion in the appropriations bill of fiscal year 1990. In essence, Congress directed the Defense Department to explore the potential for using the auroral regions for improving communications and navigation and surveillance. From there, the assignment came that the Navy and the Air Force were to manage the program, and we were directed to do so.
In his autobiography, Tesla said the impulse that dominated him was to harness the energies of nature to the service of man. If this is what Haarp is all about, it is a noble experiment indeed. But Dr. Eastland, who was a great admirer of Tesla, was removed from the project long before the Department of Defense took it over. Which leads us to ask, what is the impulse that dominates modern scientists and military planners? What does the Air Force and Navy believe Haarp can ultimately contribute to their objective? And are there really any civilian objectives that can be met by Haarp technologies? Dr. Eastland's patents, which were held by ARCO, now seem to be largely forgotten. Or are they?
When you look at the other patents built upon the work of Eastland, it becomes clear how the military intends to use a Haarp transmitter. It could give them a tool to replace the electromagnetic pulse effect of some atmospheric thermonuclear devices still considered an option by some planners. It can replace the huge, extremely low-frequency submarine communication system. It could replace the over-the-horizon radar system once planned for the current location of Haarp with a much more accurate system. It could provide a wide-area Earth-penetrating beam capable of detecting underground nuclear test sites. It could even provide a tool for geophysical probing that would define gas, mineral, and oil deposits over vast regions. And it could also be used to detect incoming low-level planes and cruise missiles.
All of that sounds reasonable, even desirable for those who are interested in a sound national defense and a more secure world. But since no one has ever built a radio transmitter this big before, some experts wonder if the side effects might not overcome the technological advantages.
In 1983, I did radio tomography with 30 watts, looking for oil in the ground. I found 26 oil wells over a 9-state area, and 100% of the time was accurate with just 30 watts of power beaming straight into solid rock. Haarp, or the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, uses 2 billion watts beamed straight into the ionosphere for experiments. Now, that's profoundly dangerous. Picture these strings on the piano as layers of the Earth. In fact, picture each string as a molecular bond length. Each one has its own frequency. What we used to do is beam radio waves into the ground, and it would vibrate any strings that were present in the ground. For instance, we might get a sound back like, and we'd say, that's natural gas. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say that's crude oil. We were able to identify each frequency for each layer of Earth that was there. We accomplished this with just 30 watts of radio power. If you do this with 2 billion watts, the vibrations are so violent that the entire piano would shake. In fact, the whole house would shake. In fact, the vibrations could be so severe underground that could even cause an earthquake.
As you might expect, the United States is not the only country in the world researching this kind of technology. Our old nemesis, the Russians, for example, have their own version, and they've been at it longer. What happens if other nations begin conducting the same experiments?
Actually, the Soviets began a series of tests starting in 1976. These became known around the world as the Russian woodpecker because they were pulsed at 10 beats per second. In October of that year, a New York Times article pointed out that not only did the Russian signal disrupt radio and telecommunications worldwide, it posed a threat to human beings by affecting the central nervous system. In 1990, the EPA released a report that suggested a causal link between extremely low-frequency electromagnetic fields and leukemia, lymphoma, and brain cancer in humans. But in the entire 440-page Haarp environmental impact statement, that fact is never mentioned. It's impossible to escape the idea that there might be a lot of other stuff they're not telling us.
You'd think that anything run by the government and invested with that much technology would be a closed book. Actually, just the opposite appears to be the case. The facility is maintained by a single caretaker whose primary job is to keep the snow off the antennas. It has its own website, and the facility is even open to the public on some occasions. Of course, not too many people venture up to Gakona, Alaska, even to see the aurora borealis. Could it be we are seeing the perfect example of something that is hidden in plain sight?
Of course, that's a major problem. No one is telling us anything except what it won't do, yet Haarp could be not only the biggest ionospheric heater in the world, it could also be the largest device ever conceived to effectively brainwash entire regional populations. The Haarp planners, of course, have never discussed any of this research, but both the Army and the Navy have been working on these concepts since the early 1960s.
Haarp officials are equally defensive about any effects their toy has had or may have on the weather. In fact, Dennis Papadopoulos, referring to the suggestion that Haarp might be the cause of some extreme weather events, said, "It's like trying to use a fly to stop a truck. I would need 1,000,000 Haarps and all the energy from the world's electricity for a year to affect a thunderstorm. It's a matter of energy levels." The official Haarp website is more specific. It states flatly that the Haarp facility will not affect the weather, and goes on to say, quote, "No association between natural ionospheric variability and surface weather has been found. However, there are those who take exception to that statement."
The statement that there is no association between the ionosphere and surface weather is an outright lie. In his book, The Weather Companion, Gary Lockhart wrote, "We can artificially influence the Earth's aurora with a relatively small amount of energy, and we know that outbursts of the northern lights do change weather patterns. There is indeed mounting evidence that upper atmospheric events affect lower atmospheric weather, and vice versa. But the evidence is not yet conclusive. As long as the subject remains controversial, Haarp scientists feel safe in discounting it. They also apparently feel safe in lying about its existence."
What they're not paying any attention to is what's happening to the ionosphere while it's being held 80 miles out into space by this high energy beam. It's heating up. And all of the molecules in that ionosphere region are absorbing energy out of that radio beam. And if they pick the right frequency to push that plume out into space, that energy may discharge back out of the ionosphere, back down the radio beam, and strike the Earth. And it would be about 100 times the energy released out of a thunderbolt. And that's how much energy would be released.
In certain applications, the military acknowledges they can literally lift the ionosphere, and what they say is, there's no problem, it's a short period of time. But when you lift up the atmosphere, the lower atmosphere rushes in and fills that void, thus changing localized weather patterns. Haarp research papers say they intend to lift a part of the ionosphere that creates a hole that they say heals over quickly. But what happens if you create enough holes that they just can't quite take care of it fast enough?
It's this question of holes that is particularly troubling. For a number of years now, a growing body of scientists and politicians have been warning of holes in the ozone layer. For the most part, the problem has been placed at the doorstep of fossil fuels and other fluorocarbon molecules, such as refrigerants. Could it be they are not the problem, or at least not the principal problem?
The reality is, the ionosphere stops the sun's most violent radiation by making ions. The stratosphere filters out most of the sun's weaker radiation, ultraviolet light, by making ozone. That's why a reduction in the ozone layer can pose a threat to life on this planet. And that's just one reason why Haarp's deliberate meddling with the ionosphere is so frightening.
Is it just a coincidence that the largest known hole in the ozone layer is over the Arctic? Could it be that Haarp research, with its disruption of the ionosphere, is accelerating or even causing the problem? We are already paying hundreds of millions of dollars in increased cost of goods and services brought on by the efforts to reduce or eliminate fluorocarbon output, ostensibly to protect the ozone layer. But the money may be the least of our problems. The fact is, life on this planet exists because the Earth's atmosphere has the ability to absorb ionizing radiation in the ionosphere and the stratosphere. Will the high-frequency auroral research project go too far in injecting energy into the ionosphere? And how far is too far?
The ionosphere is a dynamic system, ever-moving, ever-changing. I don't think anyone on this planet really knows when enough is enough.
Sometimes we work at solving a mystery just for the sheer fun of it. And most of the time, if you come up with the wrong answer, you can just go back and start over. Could it be that the wrong answer on this one will have us all playing a harp?